Oh,
So is Gen X the last comic book generation?
That's a very good question.
Gen X likes nostalgia, and maybe we're overdoing the nostalgia at this point in our life. But one of the things I know Gen X is comic book collectors. If you go online, if you see videos, if you see anything related to the comic industry, the vast majority of it is Gen X. And so I don't know if you ever were into comic books.
I wasn't. I read actual books. Sorry, not that that's like they're better, but that sounded bad. I read books that were like, books.
Graphic novels with less pictures.
I didn't read graphic novels. I don't think it's because I wouldn't have. I think it's just because I really wasn't exposed to them. I really wasn't.
It was very much a boy thing.
It was a boy thing, but like I read Magazine.
Yeah, we'll
That'd
get to
probably
that.
be the closest. But yeah, I mean, I never read actual comic books, graphic novels.
No, I know that my mom, she said that she read some in the 60s when she was a kid. But for me, and for a lot of people in Gen X, comic books were a big part of our everyday life.
Mhm.
So there were some rituals. There would be the comic book spinner at 7-Eleven.
I know what that looks like.
Yep.
Mhm.
And there would sometimes just be in the magazine rack, just comic books at the bottom.
Mhm.
There were a lot of bookstores, and then they sold comic books. And there were a lot of little convenience stores, and there was always a section just full of comic books.
Right.
So as a kid, the Avengers, the X-Men, Spider-Man, the Hulk, all the ones that they're making movies about, that was the world I lived in. And you know what's great is I think comic books are the reason why I felt like I could actually make a living as an illustrator.
I was just thinking about how I'm kind of a nerd failure because I never really understood all of the comic superhero universes and who went where. I never got that. And I didn't really care. Like a superhero to me was a superhero, and I thought they all just got along. I didn't know that there was so much like intricate drama.
Yeah, we'll get to that in a second.
Okay, I'll let you lead this one.
Yeah. So for me, I remember, gosh, what was it? About 1977. I was living in Rolling Meadows, Illinois, and there was a little convenience store called the White Hen.
Mhm.
And I've already been into comic books. I've already been reading them. That was all my thing. I was
We're
drawing. Yeah.
feminine.
I was already really a fan.
Mhm.
But then, and I love toys. That's a whole other podcast. We can talk about 70s toys and Gen X and all the cool stuff we had. I know you got lots of cool toys when you were a kid. But yeah.
I'm sorry, I got a speak and spell on the shelf behind me, and it still works, and it was my favorite, and I still love it.
So I went to a White Hen,
We'll get to that
and then
later.
there was a comic book called The Micronauts, and I lost I couldn't believe it because that was my favorite toy. Like Mego created a whole line of these little superhero. Well, they weren't superheroes; they were like
Micronauts.
spacemen
Okay.
and Microtron and Biotron and Space Glider and all the Acroyer and all these cool little toys that they had little magnet shoulders and joints. You could put them together, and they had the coolest spaceships.
So they were like micro astronauts.
Yeah, they were
Okay.
all from the future, and I loved those toys so much. And all of a sudden, there's a comic book, The Micronauts. I saw issue number 2, and I couldn't believe it. And when I opened it up, the artwork was astounding. Michael Golden, one of the best comic book artists I ever saw in my life. And I'm looking at it thinking, I could do this.
Mhm.
Not because I could do what he's doing, but I could wait, people are making a living at this. And it was inspiring.
Sure.
So the thing is, comic books for a lot of kids, it wasn't just the stuff that people think it is. It isn't just fighting and violence and whatever. All the movies are representing very different versions of what really was appealing for comic books to a lot of Gen X kids. It was the hero's journey that we weren't even aware of. We didn't even know that was a thing, but it was being displayed in the books. And some of the most amazing writers, the most intelligent, high quality writers were creating and crafting stories that were way above the pay grade of most of the kids reading it.
Mhm.
But I can say that one of the appeals for comic books was they seemed to really respect their audience. I remember in the 5th grade, I wrote a paper to the teacher about how humanity is destined to keep evolving, and at some point human beings will evolve unique abilities, and those unique abilities will continue to evolve to something almost superpower like, and then there will be a huge divide between mankind, between the mutations and the non-mutant humans. And it'll be a lot like the stories of civil rights acts and fight, all the things that happen in the world. And it was because I was reading the X-Men, and that was the theme underneath it all. It was an analog for civil rights. The mutants were an analog for people of color or for the Jewish people or anything else, and then the way that society often treated the other. And that was a very deep theme.
Okay. Is that relevant to like people with actual superpowers that live among us?
It certainly could be. Tell me what you mean.
Well, I think the human beings are, evolving and using a percentage of their abilities. And as we evolve as a species, we remember and awaken into more of who we are and what we're capable of. And superpowers may not be shooting lasers out of your eyes, but some people can kind of do that. It's not really like visible, but some people can really kind of knock you down with their stare. Similar. But the superpowers that average people have that we take for granted that we don't really even understand are extraordinary. There's a lot of extraordinary humans that are like superheroes walking around right now.
So I don't think comic books anywhere, like the Gen Z, millennials especially, I don't even know what's coming after, but I really don't see the comic book world appealing to them the way it did to me and to my friends.
I don't know what the current culture of it is.
Well, sales are like, you think with the movies that they'd be skyrocketing, but they're really not.
So what is it about the shift in our generation from analog to digital that may be affecting that?
Well, I know a lot of kids would rather spend $50 on a game that they can play over and over again.
Well, you're working on a comic right now that's digital. So you put that onto online so it can be read.
Yeah, that's still a shift that's happening.
Yeah, but
online
there's
comics
a lot of people producing online comics.
Yeah.
I looked at a couple of them when I was looking at yours and I was not impressed. I think, okay, this is going to sound terrible. I'm going to try and say this in the best way. Before just anyone could publish anywhere, there was a curation process. You had to apply and submit your work, books, comic books. I mean, I'm sure you're familiar with this. Before you could publish a comic book, you had to prove yourself. You had to create something that had substance and that people liked and that were willing to put their company behind to put it on that shelf in the 7-Eleven. So we've evolved into a place where I think this is really good in a lot of ways, but I think it's also it creates a dilution of quality where anybody can publish something. Excuse me while I turn this off. I don't know what that is. Let me just pause and go back a second because that was really interruptive and I did not. That. Okay. I'm going to say this, and I don't want this to sound bad, but since we've gotten to a place where pretty much anybody can self-publish, it's diluted the quality of what is published. And I think this goes for, comic books, applies to that, but it also applies to regular books and ebooks and, pretty much everything. We have gotten to a place where there's this universal sharing going on. In a lot of ways, I think it's very cool because you don't have to jump through giant hoops in big companies to have your art be seen. I think it's wonderful. But it also makes it harder to find stuff that you really align that's really good.
Yep. So the 80s was really kind of a big launching pad for that, not only in comic books, but just everything in general, music, everything. In the 80s, it's not like there hasn't been an independent like world of self-publishing artists.
Sure.
But in the 80s, a lot of independent comic book publishers managed to get a foothold instead of Marvel and DC, and that's all you had. You had the X-Men universe or you had the Superman universe.
See, I didn't even know that.
But in the 80s, there were independent publishers, and there were so many cool comic books like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles that happened in 1985.
What universe were they in?
They were in their own.
They were in
It's
their
an
own.
independent publisher. It had
Okay.
nothing to do with the others.
See, I don't know this stuff.
And so a lot of other artists were able to then, like, say you weren't at the Marvel DC level, which again, like you said, I mean, I broke into the industry, and I still didn't actually find full-time work
Mhm.
as a penciler. But if I were to go with the independents, there's a much likelier chance that my work
Yeah.
will hit the press.
Absolutely.
But it was a great experience. Like being a kid in the 80s, once a week, once a month, you had to wait that into anticipation. Because you were asking earlier, what's the difference between analog and digital?
Well,
Well, one
yeah,
of them
yeah.
is a kid could hold the comic book in their hand and read it. You know, I think there's still a huge debate. Digital comics, there's digital publishing. You can go on Kindle and KDB and all these things, and you can read a comic book on your mobile device of some kind of
Yeah,
iPad.
sure,
But I
sure.
don't know if people really even still want to do that. But holding it in your hand and being connected to the character and being connected to the story
Mhm.
and being respected by the writers and the artists for this like thing they're trying to develop for you.
Yeah,
And then once a month, poof, you had to wait for the next episode.
right.
So there was something really fun about that.
Yeah, and I think that's the delayed gratification that we've lost with the I want it now culture and the ability to have it now. If you're reading something and you want to read more, if that one's not out, you can read 5 other things over here.
Yeah.
But it does go back to when you're holding a physical comic book or a physical book that you're reading in your hands. Like we like to have physical books.
Yeah,
I don't like reading digitally personally.
I don't know how much of a Gen X thing that is either.
I don't know. I think for me it's just if I'm reading, I like to kind of get away from the technology stuff for a little
Yeah.
bit. And the whole point of reading to me is to not be holding a digital device and to be in an analog space. And I think that Gen X does have the appreciation for the analog that's getting lost.
One of the other funs about being in the comic book world as a fan was you get to be a collector.
Yeah.
And there was, and I up until 2018, I had a fairly extensive collection, which I sold, you know, finally just lugging these big boxes around full of comics.
I remember helping a friend move, and
Yeah.
I'm not going to say his name, but he'll know who he's talking. He'll know who that I'm talking about him. But we moved like probably 15 bankers boxes full of comics.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, it's your thing.
There was a time where I was short on rent when I, you know, like 1992. So I had Fantastic Four number 48. It was the first appearance of Galactus and the Silver Surfer, and it was in pristine condition. I bought it at Chicago Comic-Con and when I was 15.
Yeah.
I bought it for $30 in 1985.
That seems expensive in 1985.
Well, in 1992, I sold it for $400.
Well, there you go.
And my roommates were like, "You didn't have any money. Now you have $400." I'm like, "Yeah, I sold this one thing." So that was part of the fun of collecting, was the value in watching something you care about, like appreciate.
Sure.
Plus, it was the other part of the fun was you go to the comic store or somebody in a flea market or a dealer anywhere, and you've been following a story, like say you've been following the Fantastic Four, and you've got all these old back issue gaps in your collection. It's fun to be like going through and like, you found it, you know.
Yeah. I think collecting is an interesting topic in general. I think we should have a whole podcast about it. Because it's an interesting, also a generational thing that I think would be really interesting to talk about. And we'll do that in another episode.
Yes.
But I'm glad you brought that up, because collecting to me and like that, that the feeling of completion of having the whole series or the whole set of something. And sometimes that one you want is really rare and hard to get a hold of, and costs a lot of money when you do find it. So,
and it was beyond the value of it. It was beyond just how much it's worth. It was very often for me, these are characters that I care about.
yeah,
I'm connected to them. I'm like, I remember this story was pivotal to this entire character's arc. And now I have a copy of it. You get to own a little piece of the history of it, and it feels very satisfying.
So how do we relate to those characters? Is that inner hero's journey, finding that part of ourselves?
A lot of times the hero is just an everyman who their life was fucked up and then something happened, and they're in this position where now they have all these powers and these responsibilities.
Yeah.
I mean, Spider-Man is the ultimate archetype of this. I mean, Stanley even wrote the famous saying, with great power comes great responsibility.
It's true.
Something I don't even know if he realized how powerful that statement was going to become, and wrote
My
it.
favorites, honestly.
Yeah.
It seriously, it's interesting because that statement comes in so many forms in so many places. And
Yep.
if Spider-Man's funny to me because I remember obviously Spider-Man from a long time ago, but then all these Spider-Mans started popping up and that most recent multiverse thing
Yeah.
and how we're explaining why there's so many Spider-Mans and like it was great. I'm like, oh, they wrapped this up nicely.
Because just like with any hero, regardless of the genre or the delivery device, whether it's a comic, a book, or a movie, we see something in our heroes that we wish we could live out in our own life. A lot of the reasons why you get emotional when you see a movie hero achieve the thing
Yeah.
is because, first of all, that's what you want for your own life. And then also some part of you inside realizes you're not living your full life. And when you see the hero succeed, you're like, I want that for me, and I'm
Yeah.
not doing anything about it. So then you get to glom on and live vicariously through, someone other's experience.
Well, it's like the fantasy world of comic books and movies and stories. And the Never Ending Story is one of my favorite. Did they ever make a comic book of that?
No.
They should have, because it would have lasted a long time.
Surprisingly, they don't work well. That's like a whole other topic, but a lot of times they'll
I
do a
just-
comic adaptation of a movie,
It doesn't work.
and it's like, eh.
Yeah. I was kind of half kidding because I called it, the Never Ending Story would have been the comic book you'd never be able to collect all of.
Oh,
because
true.
It would just go on.
Well, speaking of
Forever.
movies, that's the other thing is because of comics, I'd say that Gen X has pretty much single-handedly funded Hollywood. It was
Tell me more.
our attachment and an affection for these characters bankrolled all these billion-dollar Marvel movies.
Oh, okay. You're talking.
Yeah,
The
especially
comic book movies, which do keep repeating themselves over and over and over and
Yeah.
over,
it's the politics in Hollywood that
which
makes
are
the movies awkward, but it's just like who owns what right, and then like, oh, I got it, so I'm going to tell the story all over again. Now I'm going to have 8 reboots. It's like if you skip all that, like Marvel, to a lot of us, the Gen Xers that love this shit, they did it so well up from like that whole Thanos stretch.
yeah.
And what's creepy is Thanos is the hero's journey.
Okay.
It's my theory anyway.
Okay.
But it was Gen Xers that probably by and large funded this stuff. We're the ones who brought our families. We're the ones who told the stories to our kids. And Gen Xers, by the way, are you the ones that have to sit there and explain the comic book history to the people that don't know this? Like if you go to a movie and they're like, why does Spider-Man feel this way? Who's Uncle Ben? Oh, well, in
Yeah.
Amazing Fantasy 15 in 1961, what happened? We know this stuff.
Yes, and by we you mean not all Gen X. The comic book fans of Generation X are now speaking through Jeremy because I don't know all this. I think I started to say earlier, I never understood why all the superheroes just didn't get along and save the world, why there was all this fighting and stuff. Because
That's a great point, because a lot of the heroes were just people like you and I. And they had their own life story, and somebody's really brooding, somebody's an orphan, somebody was abandoned as a child, somebody was an alien that got, treated like a normal person.
Yeah.
Every one of them had a different version of their life story. And it's the same reason why none of us can get along the way we ought to in the world.
And maybe that's the whole thing, is to relate to the superpowers that these superheroes have that we do love, and maybe tell us who your favorite superhero was.
Yeah.
Obviously, as a non-comic book fan, I still was exposed to superheroes, and superpowers have been something I love talking about for a very long time, because I see that we have that. Batman's my favorite just because I like saying I'm Batman. I don't know why, but I do. I think it's funny, and it might be because of the Lego movie. I don't know. But I mean, Batman and Robin, the original stuff was just so ridiculous and fun that was kind of my first, I don't know, my first superhero crush was definitely like the Batman and Robin, the silliness of that and how wonderful and crazy and all that,
Yeah. So
cliche superhero at its finest.
what would be your favorite superpowers? If you could have any, what
Yeah.
would they be? What would your superpowers be if you could have them?
I think if I think about other like superheroes and comic book characters or whatever. I've always thought it would be really cool to be able to breathe underwater and to just be able to freely explore underwater. Probably because, as humans, it's hard. It's hard. We have to do stuff and we have to bring air and things like that. But it'd be really cool to be amphibious or be able to live on the earth and underwater.
Me and my friends had some really weird superpower ideas.
Yeah.
Like I could make your taste buds reappear in any other part of your body, or
That's
superpower.
Like, why would you want to do that?
Just because when you're a boy.
Oh, you mean you could do that to somebody else?
Yes, not me. God, no, mine are fine where they are. But like, if you could make somebody's taste buds reappear inside their bladder, or or somewhere in their intestine,
really 12-year-old boy mode. Totally.
Surprise.
I love it. Not surprised.
I think there was one character who was it was a comic book called Alpha Flight, and there was one character called Shaman because he was a Native American, so no coincidence there. And he had a medicine pouch, but it was connected to the entire Great Mystery, and he could reach into that pouch and be connected to the other side in a very deep mystical level. I always thought that would be the coolest thing, to be able to communicate with the other side through my magic pouch.
Well, there you go. So now you get to do it as a human being.
Yep.
Just have the other side talking to you. I still haven't figured out how to breathe underwater, though. I need to pick a different superpower.
So to wrap this up, we would like to invite you to check out our links below, because not only do we talk about these kinds of things, we have lots of other topics that we talk about, primarily just the whole Gen X lifestyle and where you're at.
Being Gen X is weird. And when we figured out that we were part of this generation that is the bridge between analog and digital, there's so many things that Gen X has been through and done. And it's kind of cool because we do have one foot in each world in a lot of ways. And we've sat and watched things unfold quickly. I think that's it too. The amount that's changed in the last 100 years has been pretty significant, but the amount that's changed in the last
20,
40, 20, it's just, there's just so much. So we've been there from like the time where TVs weren't even in color to now your TV is in your hand on your phone. Like it's just been a wild transition of growth and an evolution. And I think our own superpowers are growing, and we're figuring out that humans are pretty amazing creatures and that we can do a lot. We can create our life. We figured that out. And when we met, we reinvented ourselves. So we like sharing how we do that. We like sharing why our life is fun and easy and the tools we use to do it. And we created all this stuff for ourselves, and people started asking us, what the heck are you guys doing? How are you, why is everything working so well? So there's a lot that goes into that, and we love talking about it. So if you're into this kind of content, like, subscribe, you know the drill, and we will see you in another video.
Ah! Oh! Oh!